This is Eileen Griffin with the Heartland View from the Heartland Daily News, bringing you information and analysis about public policy stories affecting your life, your health, your freedom, and the nation's economy. This week we're going to cover several different stories. We're going to cover them at a high level, as usual, just give you a brief overview, but I will tell you they're all very good, and you may want to look at the full details on heartlanddailynews.com. We're going to start with an article by Dennis Prager called Why Freedom is in Serious Jeopardy. And he's ringing the alarm bells about our loss of freedom and basically pointing out that this should be a concern to all Americans. He says those who seek to control others and those who want to be controlled are on the same side, working together against freedom. Quote, the ease with which Australians, Canadians, and New Zealanders have accepted the loss of liberty in their respective countries has been the saddest and most frightening development since the rise of totalitarianism in the early 20th century, end quote. And then he points out that what's worse is what's happening here in America, that we see nearly 50% of Americans seeming to be willing to accept totalitarianism, willing to give up freedom in favor of tyranny. Almost half the country. So those are things that are now putting us in jeopardy and threatening our lifestyle, threatening our way of life and our freedoms. Attacks on our liberties have three methods of assault. He points out we're forcing Americans into opposing camps and encouraging hatred and fear of one another. And there's three different methods that they use to achieve these goals. One has been COVID, so we've seen that, the fear, the concern, everybody's fearful, and then also scared of each other. Racism, that's become an issue to divide Americans. Climate change continues to be something they use against Americans. Prager says, quote, by ratcheting up fear and hysteria, the left is using each to end individual liberty, including freedom of speech, for the first time in American history, end quote. So this loss of freedom, he's telling us it should be concerning to all of us. It's an alarm bell going off. There's this loss of freedom. We're seeing it creep and slower, and now it's going to speed up. And as Ben Shapiro writes, this loss of freedom in terms of leadership, and I always put leadership in quotes when we're talking about the political leadership, but he calls it our elective monarchy. And he says this disregard for our freedoms and our Constitution happened when we have a president who desires to be a monarch. They desire this unfettered power. And right now we do have that happening. We have this unfettered power, we have this growth of power, we have a power grab happening. And what's stopping it? What's the one thing preventing a monarch president? Well, he says there's two things. He says one, it's the states, and two, it's the courts. So fortunately, a lot of the governors in red states, and there's elected officials and legislators at the state level across the country who are standing in the way. And they are stepping up to defend the Constitution and the American way of life. There's also the courts. So the courts have had to step in and declare things unconstitutional. And clearly you see this connection between some of the activities that the states are having to take on and the courts, because the monarch president wants to have this power regardless of the other entities in government, whether it's state or whether it's the Supreme Court. So you see, for example, on immigration, the states are having to step up, particularly the border states. They're having to deal with immigration because the federal government has abandoned the border and abandoned the rule of law in terms of immigration. So Shapiro points out when something's unconstitutional, we hope that the Supreme Court will weigh in. That's the rule of this balance, the checks and balances we have in our government. That's why we have the checks and balances. Well, for example, President Biden knew darn well that it was unconstitutional to have a moratorium on evictions on private homeowners. Yet he did it anyway. The Supreme Court, he knew the Supreme Court would rule against it, yet he did it anyway. How about President Obama? He knew very well that he couldn't unilaterally make immigration law. He even said it over 20 times, pointed it out himself. He knew he couldn't unilaterally declare immigration law, yet he did. That's how we ended up with DACA. And it's been declared unconstitutional. Yet, today, we still have DACA. So what's to stop these power-hungry, those who want to take control, those who desire control? What stops them? So we talked about the states. We're fortunate enough that we have states stepping up. We have the Supreme Court. What else can stop this movement? How about freedom-loving Americans? Americans who don't want to be controlled. Americans who do desire freedom and liberty and the opportunity to pursue happiness. Those people. That's why tearing people apart is so important to this plan. We're so busy fighting each other, we're not realizing that all Americans benefit when we have our freedoms, when we have our ability to pursue happiness and economic success. So back to Prager's article on division, this division between these groups. So if you use COVID, well, you're dividing Americans based on one, just fear of each other and isolating from one another. And now you're looking at the division between vaccinated and unvaccinated Americans, attacking each other because they have different viewpoints. What about racism, as Prager pointed out? Racism has been weaponized. So racism is a serious issue, and yet it's been weaponized and minimized to the point where if you didn't pay attention to the California recall election, one thing you might want to notice is the opposing person, Larry Elder, is an African-American man from South Central LA, no great place to grow up. He challenged the sitting governor, who comes from San Francisco, a well-heeled family, very wealthy, a white man, and yet the left called Elder a racist. So while we're busy tearing each other apart on these issues, talking about racism and calling each other racists and yelling at each other because one's vaccinated and one's not, while we're busy tearing each other apart, some of the people behind the scenes, some of these bad actors, are using all of this to tear the entire country down. It's very concerning. So if everybody disagrees with each other, why can't we come together? Why can't we come together? Well, we can't if we keep thinking we're on opposite sides of everything. And of course, climate change comes in to play because, as you know, President Obama told us, never let a good crisis go to waste, and climate change is a perpetual crisis. Now, there's one other big division that they use against us, and that's this class warfare. And again, that's not new. It's been going on for a long time. So this mantra that some of the political elites continue to press, especially when they want more money for more spending, and then, of course, the complicit mainstream media encourages it and spreads it as well. And it's this mantra, tax the rich, and they're not paying their fair share. So we hear that over and over and over again. They're not paying their fair share. But David Harsanyi has an article this week also, Heartland Daily News. And the article is entitled, "Sorry AOC, the rich already pay their fair share." And so he points out that the wealthy people in this country are already paying far more in taxes than most any other Americans. In 2018, the top 1% of income earners made nearly 21% of all income, but paid 40% of all federal income taxes. The top 10% earned 48% of the income and paid 71% of all federal income tax. So why are we saying they're not paying their fair share? It's just false. More than 61% of Americans, on the other hand, around 107 million households, paid zero federal income tax for the year 2020. So this is just a false narrative. But people believe it thanks to the complicit media and other people that continue to just perpetuate this. It's a false narrative. The wealthy in this country are carrying an awful lot of people on their backs. One other point that he makes in this article is that nearly 70% of the Forbes 400 richest Americans are also self-made. They created this wealth out of nothing. And those are the people that drive the engine of prosperity in this country, those entrepreneurs. In other words, hard work, sacrifice, intelligence, ideas, creativity, ingenuity, that's what drives the engine of economic success. And that can't happen if you don't have entrepreneurs and people incentivized to start a business, grow a business, and drive business. But that's what the left wants to tax into oblivion. They want to tax into oblivion these self-made job creators who carry 60% of Americans on their back. What's going to happen if you destroy that income stream? So most Americans should care a whole lot about this and be very concerned about driving those people away, because their creativity, their talent, their hard work, their energy, their sacrifices, their willingness to grow business has created jobs, has employed people, it pays taxes. So what's not to feel unified about that? We should all be unified in support of our own prosperity. So Star Parker points this out in her article about Democrats spend big and why we pay for their socialist dream. So as we've been monitoring for quite some time, the last several months, ever since President Biden took office, there's enormous spending bills. So there's just ideas and intentions and new programs and everything that's going to create an enormous amount of expense. And so we know, again, that's one of the reasons why this mantra of tax the rich, they're not paying their fair share, is such an important part of their messaging. all these spending plans. But as we pointed out in a previous segment, it's already been reported that there is no way that even taking every single dime from the wealthy Americans are going to pay for all of this new spending. So it'll be the middle class that pays, and they'll pay in terms of not just higher taxes, fewer services, more disruptions in their day-to-day lives. So while the current administration wants to reallocate our income, the only people who won't suffer under these new regimes and the monarch president and tyrannical government and the loss of our freedoms, the only group that will gain from all of this will be the people that are already elites in government and people that want more power. So what about the poor that will supposedly benefit from taxing the rich? That's the other half of the mantra. Well, because the rich aren't paying their fair share, the poor aren't getting what they're entitled to. And we've also done a disservice to the poor by building that messaging as well. But Parker points out, quote, there are so-called political leaders that pretend to care about America's poor. The last thing America's poor need is a slowed down, sluggish economy larded down by massive new government, end quote. So all these anti-American attacks, all this division messaging, what's the reality of all this? Well, all Americans will suffer under a monarch president or any type of tyrannical government. We all lose. We all lose freedoms. We all lose the opportunity for prosperity. We all lose the right to pursue our own happiness. But most of these divisions are fabricated. Most Americans want the American dream. We want to be able to pursue our happiness and prosper. Most Americans are built, it's part of our DNA, to have that can-do spirit that Ronald Reagan told us we had, and that we still have. So, a unified American culture, American people, we can do all kinds of great and wonderful things. But the division is what's tearing us apart. Most Americans don't see division on a day-to-day basis. We work side by side with people from all kinds of backgrounds, and we want to work together to be successful and to do a good job and to enjoy life and our day-to-day things. We don't want to hate each other. Hate is non-productive, and it's painful, and it's disruptive. So, the American way of life is something worth fighting for. We can all succeed, we can all be together and prosper. So don't fall for these myths of division. We don't want to be divided as Americans. We want to come together as Americans. We're all in this together. And that's the message. That's this week's news from the Heartland View. For all of the details on all of these fabulous stories, please go to heartlanddailynews.com. And if you're interested in the work of the Heartland Institute, please look at our website, heartland.org. As always, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.